It was when I was facing a loaded gun and the robber who was holding it was laughing at me with showing his ugly yellow teeth. And I had a thought, why do I take such stupid risks? That I was literally in a gunfight and a sword fight over a statue. But let me back up for a moment and tell you how the evening went. Lakheera had gone and sat on a table in the middle of the bar. He and his two men were sitting, drinking, chatting, laughing, and Zuleekha's bar had become really crowded by this point. I saw that Lakheera's men were holding on to a bag, and I was very sure that it was in that bag that the priceless golden dancer statue was kept. But I was thinking that the way things stood right then, there was no chance I could steal or nick the statue off of them. So I had to come up with a plan, and something was forming in my brain. I stood by the counter and suddenly I heard the men in the bar started to cheer and whistle. I was surprised and then I looked back only to see Nafisa enter from the kitchen. Nafisa was a beautiful woman. She was dressed in a typical traditional blue dress. She dressed provocatively and walked sensually. She smiled at the men, and I suspected that there was not one man in the bar at that moment who was not secretly in love with Nafisa. She walked behind me, entered the counter of the bar where there was a shelf of where all the liquor bottles were kept. She climbed a stool and started to unlock the top shelf of the liquor cabinet. All the eyes in bar were fixed on Nafisa. She slowly opened the doors of the top shelf, and inside there was a beautiful black bottle with a red top and some sort of a snake or a reptile carved around it. She turned to speak to the man and said, "We are fortunate enough to have a bottle of Nagras here with us today." And suddenly, everyone in the bar started to cheer as if the bottle had been brought for them. I had never tasted Nagras. It was a kind of an alcohol that has achieved a legendary status. Men who have tasted it say there is nothing like it. It is the most delicious and smooth and the most intoxicating alcohol you would ever taste. They say that if you ever have the opportunity to drink Nagaras, you would never be able to drink anything else. Nafisa then raised two of her fingers and said, "This bottle is available only for the price of 2 gold coins." And all the cheering in the bar died down. I knew that even if you pool together money from everyone at that bar at that moment, there won't be enough for 2 gold coins. Nafisa smiled and stepped down, and the bottle remained inside for everyone. She slowly made her way towards me and came to stand beside me. She smiled and said, "I noticed your eyes are stuck on Lakheera today, isn't it? Yeah, I was taken by surprise. I thought I had been spying on Lakheera very covertly without giving myself away. But I guess I should not be surprised. Nafisa is actually the one who runs Zuleekha's bar, while Zuleekha is the big boss lady who takes care of her whole empire. But this bar in Kurambag is completely under the domain of Nafisa. But she's way more than a typical bar lady. Yes, she takes care of everything that happens in the bar, but she knows everything about everyone on stage who's having an affair with who. In fact, I would say that Nafisa might know more about the gentry of Misana than even the most, I don't know, well-informed journalist. So she said, "Why are you looking at Lakheera?" And I thought there was no reason to lie, but no reason to tell the truth as well. I said, "Yeah, oh, I heard about him. What can you do?" She said, "Well, well, I would tell you to be careful of him. He's a very dangerous man at Riyan." And I said, "Oh, yes, I know. I don't think you do. Did you read that report about that old senator from who died last month? The one who was in the war cabinet?" I said, "Yeah, I read about him, but what has that got to do with Lakheera?" Well, Nafisa said, "I heard that it was Lakheera who took the man out." I said, "No, I think what I read was that he died of old age." She shook her head. "No, I know for sure that he did not die of old age." I looked at her a little suspiciously, wanting to test if she was just making this up. And I said, "How do you know?" She said, "One of my girls told me. In fact, I know pretty much everything about every member of the war cabinet. You want to know about them?" I said, "Maybe later." Suddenly, the door of Zuleika's bar opened again, and right outside the bar, a huge caravan of, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 horses pulling a carriage had come to stop. And out stepped a lady with 2 bodyguards. She was dressed in very expensive silk clothes, but her face was draped. She walked inside, her bodyguards following her. And I said to Nafisa, "Who exactly is she?" Nafisa shrugged and then went to meet her. The lady passed right in front of me, and for a fraction of a moment, she turned towards me and looked at me. Our eyes met, and I was surprised. She was quite young, probably 22, 23. But then she averted her eyes and went to sit at a table that was reserved for VIPs. And I thought, well, I don't know who she is, but I was too fixated on Lakheera at that point to really think about her. Maybe she is from some wealthy family out here to just experience, for some reason, the atmosphere of Zuleika's bar. Who knows? Who cares? I saw that there was one other man in the bar besides me who was also looking at Lakheera. He was standing right opposite me near the other wall. He looked a little disheveled. Uh, he looked as if he had not shaved for a couple of days. He was wearing a white suit, but it was also dirty. I seemed to have seen him somewhere in Misana, probably. I was not very sure. And then it struck me, isn't that the doctor? A doctor? Yeah, I think I had seen him somewhere. He had a pretty good practice in Misana. What had led to this situation here, and why was he looking at Lakheera in that manner? He started to move towards Lakheera, and I thought, well, this is interesting. So I thought maybe this might be a moment where I could, get close to Lakheera. And so there was a table near Lakheera's table that was, no one was sitting over there. So I took a chair over there with my back towards him, with my back towards Lakheera. So I listened to what the doctor was going to say to Lakheera. The doctor came to stop near Lakheera's table, and I could hear what they were saying. He said, Lakheera. His voice was hoarse. Lakheera, return my clinic, return my house, return my money. And I thought, interesting. Lakheera completely ignored the doctor. The doctor went on, I know you cheated last week in that game of cards. I know now. I was a fool to play with you. I thought, oh, I had heard this about Lakheera, that he was really good at cards. Not only was he good at it, but he was kind of a cheat. And poor saps like this doctor apparently routinely lost their hard-earned money. And it seemed that this doctor had probably lost a lot more. Lakheera simply replied, no, go away. The doctor gargled and said something else and said, no, return my money or else. And Lakheera said, or else what? And the doctor said, I will go to police. Lakheera laughed, and both of his men laughed. Said, police? All right, go to the police. The doctor knew, and I knew, and everyone knew that the police would not really be able to do anything to Lakheera. What Nafisa had told me and what the judge had told me about how Lakheera operated, there seemed to be someone who was protecting Lakheera. And a normal police inspector would be able to do anything to Lakheera? Well, that was doubtful. The doctor suddenly seemed to lose his mind, and he lunged at Lakheera as if he would choke him. But the doctor was weak and frail, and Lakheera's men, who were tall and muscular, suddenly stood up, grabbed the doctor, and gave him a push so hard that the doctor fell down on the floor in front of me. The guards who were standing by the door, who usually guarded the bar, came running as if to stop the fight. But Lakheera's men said, that man was attacking boss. Take him away. Well, what could they do? The guards grabbed the doctor and took him outside the bar. Lakheera's men followed. I turned to look at the seat that was vacated by his men. The bag had been left alone. No one was guarding it at that moment. I turned a little bit more to look at Lakheera, and I saw him looking at me. He was looking at me while I was looking at the bag. And I thought, well, this is as good a chance as any. So I got up, turned my chair, and sat at Lakheera's table. Lakheera was suddenly taken by surprise. He said, what? Who are you? Why are you sitting here? And I said, Lakheera, I heard you like cannibal. Is it only the poor saps like the doctor with whom you can pick a fight? Want to try a game with me tonight? Lakheera said, who are you? And why should I play with you? I said, well, I will give you one reason, or rather six good reasons. I took something out from my pocket. It was a black bag. Lakheera's eyes became large as he looked at the bag. I opened the small bag and poured the contents onto the table. Inside the bag, there were six diamonds. Lakheera just gave the diamonds. And I said, reason enough, Lakheera? Want to have a game of cards with me? He looked at me as if still making his mind. I don't know. Why should I play with you? I said, don't tell me, Lakheera. Are you afraid of losing to me? I knew that I had to goad Lakheera a little. He was not a man who could be pushed, and I wanted to push him a little. What do you say, Lakheera? Do you have the guts to play with me? I knew that Lakheera was angry. I also knew that my insult was working. I raised my voice and called Nafisa. Nafisa? She turned to look at me. She had been talking to someone else at the other corner of the bar. And I said, Nafisa, can we have that bottle of Nagras? Everyone gasped. Lakheera looked at me. And I smiled back. I wanted to make sure that he would rise to the challenge. He would take the bait. Nafisa came towards the table and a waitress brought the bottle and two glasses. Nafisa was looking at me as if to say, are you sure you want to do this with him? I didn't say anything. I didn't want her interfering right now. I took the bottle and poured it out in both the glasses. I slid one glass towards Lakheera and one towards me. I picked up my glass and I sipped the drink. The first sip of Nagras. It was like sipping onto a cold electric liquid. It sort of stung my tongue as soon as I sipped it. Then, when it started to go down my throat, it felt like a hot lava that was slowly making its way towards my belly. For a moment, I thought that my eyes started to water. The drink was so strong as if there was nothing like it. And for a moment, I thought it was actually poison. But then, when everything had calmed down, I felt a sort of warmth radiating towards me. Lakheera took his own glass as well and stared at it hungrily. I was sure that even he had never tasted Nagras. Very few people had. There was a good reason. It was banned in Misana. Now that I had tasted it, I knew why. But if there was a place in Misana where you could find such a drink, it was Zuleekha's bar. And if there was an occasion to use it, I believe this was as good as any. Lakheera took his glass, sniffed at it as if he was a great connoisseur of alcohol, and then, in just one gulp, downed the whole drink. He put down the glass, smacking his lips. I said, what do you say? He looked at the diamonds again, and I sort of slid it towards them. Why don't you check it for yourself if they're real or not? Lakheera picked up one of the diamonds and then held it against the light that was coming from the back. I saw that Lakheera's two men had now re-entered the bar. They came to stand near me and said, "Boss, who is this man?" Lakheera said nothing. He was still looking at the diamond. He slowly lowered it and kept it back on the table and said, "It looks real." So I said, "All right, I'll play with you." And I said, "Okay, what do you have to offer?" Lakheera said, "Gabru, take out the statue." Gabru, one of Lakheera's men, said, "Boss, are you sure we are here for that deal?" "Gabru, take out the statue." I said to Lakheera, "Your men don't want us to play. Why don't you listen to him? Maybe he's right. Maybe you should not be playing with me." But Lakheera just looked angrily at me. And Gabru, his men, did not really have the heart to argue with his boss. So he opened the bag, and I felt that after so many years, I'm so close to the statue. And then he took out the statue, and my heart skipped a beat, just the way it had so many years back when I had first seen that statue. It was still the same beautiful, like statue of a dancer frozen in one of her dance books. I was filled with anger again that it was in the hands of Lakheera right now. But I thought, no, no, for a few moments more, and then it would be mine. He kept the dancer in near him and said, "Do you know what this is?" And I nodded. "I know." "So, what game do you want to play?" I said, "King's Bluff." It was a simple game. And Lakheera laughed, and his men laughed. And I guess I knew why. Lakheera prided himself as being really expert with cards. And this was a game that it was exceptionally easy to cheat. Cheat someone who didn't really know the game. And I knew Lakheera's was the kind of man who probably usually played King's Bluff. He agreed quite readily. I was okay. He took out a deck of cards and he started to shuffle the deck and handed out the cards. Three were given to me, three to him, and the deck was kept in the middle of the table. The cards were facing down. I could not see the cards, nor could he. The rules were simple. There would be 3 rounds. One who won the most of the rounds, 2 or 3, would win the card game. The way it worked was, I could either look at the card, and if I didn't like the card, I could swap out for one card from the deck. Or I could play it blind. At the end of the round, whoever had the bigger hand would win that round. Lakheera looked at his cards, gave a sort of a dissatisfied grunt, threw one of the card and picked another from the deck. I let my card remain unseen, remain facing down. Lakheera said, "Are you not going to look at your cards?" I said, "No, I'm not. I believe in myself, Lakheera. I have a confidence in myself. These cards, oh, they are just secondary." Lakheera gave a smirk. "We'll see." We both showed our hands. Lakheera's hand was a bigger hand. Mine was not as strong. I had lost. Lakheera laughed and his men laughed. "Well, he has a lot of confidence in himself," Lakheera said. and his men started to laugh again. And by this time, a crowd had started to form around us because the word had gone down that a really high stakes game was being played. Diamonds for gold. The second round started. Same thing. Three cards to me, three cards to Lakheera. He said, "Are you not going to look at your cards again?" I said, "No." "Why? Are you?" Lakheera was about to pick his cards and then said, "Well, let's play blind then." I said, "You are feeling a little too cocky, isn't it, Lakheera?" I filled his glass. The Nagras was having an effect on Lakheera, who had been downing one glass after another. His words were slurring a bit, but he was a big man. He took another big gulp of his drink and he said, "Well, I'll play the way I play the way that you are playing." Even I was feeling a little bit of an effect from the drink, and I was feeling unusually brave. I should definitely not have been feeling as brave as I was, because I was literally surrounded by men who were ready to kill me. And I was not even sure what would happen if I won the game. But anyways, that was the situation. We were both facing each other. We had both not looked at our cards, and there was a crowd standing right around us. I said, "Sure." We both flipped our cards, and this time I had a better hand. I had won round two. Lakheera was furious. It felt as if he could not understand what was happening because he was very sure that he would win. He took the cards again and started to shuffle the deck, but this time his hands were shaking. I don't know why, out of anger or out of the intoxication. I had no idea. So I took the cards from his hand. I said, "Allow me, Lakheera," and I started to shuffle the deck. He was looking closely to see that I did not cheat. I smiled. I handed one card to him, one card to me, second card to him, and the second card to me, third card to him, and that to me. And I kept the deck in the middle. Lakheera just stared at me for the moment, and this time he did not wait, he just looked at his cards. And I knew from his face that those cards were not very good. He was about to say something, but then suddenly we heard a scream, a very loud scream, and the crowd parted and we looked in the direction from where the scream had come. Around the VIP table section, where that rich lady and her bodyguards were sitting, they were suddenly surrounded by four men who had draped a white cloth on their head and the face. Only their eyes were visible. Two of them were holding a gun and pointing it at the bodyguards of the woman. One man was holding a rather large sword, and the fourth man had grabbed that girl and was holding a dagger near her throat as if about to cut it. The girl had screamed. She was trying to fight the man. I saw her. She wasn't, I would say she had not given up. She was trying to wrench herself free from that man, but he was holding on to her too tightly. Her bodyguards didn't really have the time to react, and both the robbers who had the guns suddenly shot at them, and the bodyguards collapsed. They were dead. And suddenly, it seemed that everyone in the bar started to shout. People started to duck for cover. Some tried to hide behind the sofas, and the tables, and the chairs, some behind the curtains. And suddenly, only I and Lakheera remained sitting by the table, still in the midst of a game. And on the other side, there were the robbers, and they were holding on to the girl. The girl's eyes looked a little afraid, and she looked at me. She looked at me, and I looked at her, and I sort of tried to tell her, calm down, calm down. The man who was holding the knife to her throat tightened his grip even more, as if to hurt her, and I tried to move and stand to make my way over to her, but he said, stay in your place. Anyone moves, she is dead. The robbers with a gun were pointing the guns at us, and they, as a group, were trying to go out of the bar. I didn't know what was happening. Suddenly, everything had changed. Why were they trying to kidnap this lady? They had walked halfway across the bar, and suddenly one of the robbers stopped and then whispered something into the ears of the man who was holding on to the girl. Probably he was their leader. The man nodded, and then they started to move towards us. Lakheera's face started to darken, as well as his men, who was still standing next to us. The robbers came, still holding on to the girl, and then said to us, give us the statue and give us those diamonds. Lakheera said, do you even know who you are talking to? I looked at Lakheera, and he was not afraid. Lakheera and men like him don't get afraid. He was just angry. Angry that anyone had dared to speak in that manner to him. The robbers, I guess, didn't really know who Lakheera was, so they said, I don't care who you are. Give us the statue. Lakheera said, no. And then he instructed his men, Rocky, Gabru. And they had to wait no longer. They suddenly jumped on two of the robbers who were holding the gun. The robbers were suddenly taken by surprise, and I struck the man who was holding the sword. With one blow, he fell down on the ground. Lakheera took on the other man, and suddenly 4 of us were in the middle of the fight. The man who was holding a dagger suddenly plunged his dagger in the thigh of Lakheera. But Lakheera, far from collapsing, just became so angry that he started to really punch that man. And he punched him so hard that the man became unconscious. Only when he had become unconscious did Lakheera even realize that he had been stabbed. And he collapsed on one side, moaning and groaning. He was partly drunk and partly in pain of the stabbing. Lakheera's men were still trying to wrestle with the robbers who were holding on to the gun. I grabbed that woman's hand and brought her towards me, and we went and tried to hide ourselves. And suddenly I heard another big noise, like an explosion, and I turned to see what had happened. Zuleekha had emerged from her office. She was holding that large rifle. She had shot the rifle as if to warn, as if to scream in protest that her precious bar had been attacked, and who had dared to attack her bar. But the men were still fighting. She pointed her gun at them as if she would eviscerate all of them, blast them off her bar. But then she pointed the muzzle towards the roof. There was a large chandelier over the man. It was huge, it was heavy, and she suddenly shot at it. And the whole chandelier collapsed and fell down on top of the men, cracking them underneath. Suddenly, the whole of the bar was filled with smoke and confusion, and people started to rush out of the bar. I turned towards that woman and I asked, "Are you okay?" She had been shaken, but she was okay, I believe. She was a brave lady, and which I would soon find out. But she nodded weakly, and I said, "All right, let's go out." Zuleekha was still standing over the men, her gun still pointed at them. The men were still trapped under the chandelier, and I thought that right now was the moment where I think we should make an escape. But the golden dancer was still at our table, and Lakheera, who was lying next to it, his leg trapped under the chandelier. And I made my way over to the table. Lakheera had been groaning weakly, but now his eyes opened and he looked at me. I picked my cards, looked at them, smiled, and then threw the cards at Lakheera. And I said to him, "Lakheera, the game is mine." He said, "Now." I said, "See you around." I picked up the statue and my diamonds and put them inside my coat jacket. Lakheera continued to groan, and I knew this was probably not the end of it. But I had won the game, fair and square. And I thought that this was the time where I should and we should make an escape. The men were trapped under the chandelier, but who knew? They might suddenly regain consciousness in a few moments, and Lakheera might wrench himself free. Plus, the most dangerous thing in that bar at that moment was Zuleekha herself. We stepped out of the bar and we suddenly heard another gunshot. Zuleekha had fired again. That girl and I looked at each other and we started to walk away. Relieved for a moment after that ordeal, we were sort of happy, and I felt another comfort that at least the golden dancer was with me. And I mistakenly thought for a moment that the adventure for tonight was over. But how wrong was I? I didn't know that the night was still just starting. But the rest of the story is for the next episode. Till then, goodbye.